Your Dog's Friend is a nonprofit 501c3 whose mission is to help keep dogs out of shelters by educating and supporting their humans. We promote positive method of training and behavior modification through stress-free methods. As part of that mission, we offer free webinars like the one you're about to watch. Subjects range from dog behavior, stress-free training, and other tools to help you understand your relationship with your dog. If you like the webinar, be sure to give us a thumbs up. Click the notification bell and subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll be notified when future videos are posted. Now enjoy the webinar.
Welcome to today's webinar, sponsored by Your Dog's Friend, a nonprofit 501c3 whose mission is to help keep dogs out of shelters by educating and supporting their humans. Since 2006, we've been promoting the use of positive dog training methods by hosting free webinars like this one, posting valuable resources on our website, offering affordable training classes in person and online, and providing free advice and referrals. Our speaker today is Alexandra Dilley. Alexandra is the owner and trainer of Home Alone Canine. She has a master's degree in animal behavior from the City University of New York and is a certified dog trainer. She has completed a separation anxiety mentorship and in 2023 co-authored research published in the peer-reviewed journal Veterinary Sciences on separation anxiety. Alexandra has over a decade of experience in working with shelter dogs and served as the Director of Behavior and Training at the Humane Rescue Alliance for 8 years. She has worked as a separation anxiety trainer for years, teaches separation anxiety classes through Your Dog's Friend, and works privately with clients. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that Your Dog's Friend is a nonprofit. So if you find this webinar helpful, please consider making a donation to support these free webinars and the other free resources that we offer. If you would like to donate, you can visit our website at yourdogsfriend.org. Okay, let's get started, and over to you, Alexandra.
All right. Thank you so much, Carrie. And I'm so grateful to Your Dog's Friend for hosting me. So what do we mean by puppies? This is puppy separation anxiety. Let's talk about what the term puppies means first. Puppies are basically talking about from birth to age 1. Most people refer to their puppies within that time period. The neonate period goes from birth to 3 weeks, and the first 2 weeks of life, puppies actually benefit from mild stress from gentle human handling, and that can help improve their stress tolerance later in life. And moderate to severe stress, though, will impair a dog's coping abilities. Then we have the transition period starting at the 3rd week of life, where the puppy's eyes open and their motor skills start to develop. And at this time, litter-mate interaction is really important. The weaning from the mother can also begin, and we really want the mother to be able to leave and return to the puppies on her own choosing, so that she's not stuck with them and getting frustrated with them. The socialization period is the next one. It goes from 3 weeks of age to 12 weeks of age. And at 7 weeks, weaning from the mother is completed. And during this time, puppies are working on refining social skills with other dogs and people. At 8 weeks, puppies start developing a location preference for elimination, and it's the ideal time for their to be adopted into their forever homes. So caregivers should make sure that throughout this time that the dog's tolerance for scary things is not overwhelmed. It doesn't mean we don't expose them to those things, but we want to make sure that that exposure is done in a gentle fashion with treats and toys, so that the puppy has positive impressions of everything that they encounter. At 8 weeks, the puppy should start to spend regular and predictable time in a crate or a safe penned-off area with toys. And after they've eaten and exercised, and we want them also to have regular access to water. Puppies should also start puppy kindergarten and have regular start vet visits before 12 weeks of age, because their ability to accept people and dogs as friends will start to diminish at this age, at 12 weeks. And new things and experiences will be less well accepted. A dog's juvenile period then goes from 3 months to a year of age, at which time we really stop referring to them as puppies. And sexual maturity occurs between 6 and 9 months of age, and social maturity actually happens between 1 year and 3 years of age. So all of these positive new impressions really have to occur before 12 to 14 weeks of age even starts, but we can't expect them to cope maturely until they reach at least a year old. And that can make training puppies to cope while alone a bit messier than for an older dog. Also, when did you get your puppy? Many people are getting young dogs after 14 weeks of age. And once they reach social maturity, any problems being alone will likely worsen. So there's a lot of things happening before the dog even comes into our lives that, are really not within our control to change after a certain period of time as far as what their initial experiences are. So what can we do if we do have young puppies? Well, we can provide them with an early enriched environment so that mom is not the only highlight of their lives. We want them to have early experiences where they can explore their environment independently and then return to mom when they want. And similarly, that mom can do the same thing. Having lots of enriching experiences and exercise is very important so that they're ready to rest when we place them into more confined areas. And we want to cultivate fun activities that build independence, like exploring different surfaces, smells, and sights. And for older puppies, we want to intervene early in any separation-related distress, including with the use of anti-anxiety medications if needed. We should gradually introduce alone time in like 10 to 20 minutes at a time when the puppy is tired and satisfied so that they don't have a very frustrating experience with it. And try to keep routines regular with just a bit of variability, maybe a half hour here and there. And practice crate training gradually with options for larger spaces if confinement is an issue. And also provide regular vet care and help for any discomfort, as that can get associated with being alone if they're not feeling well. Pay attention to and get help for any potential noise sensitivities as well. So one thing a lot of people wonder is this a genetic issue or is it bad experiences? And as I've started to lay out, it's never one or the other. Experiences can cause the expression of genetic predispositions. So dogs vary also on temperament traits like frustration, tolerance, impulsivity, and fear and anxiety, among others. And these temperament traits are actually relatively constant throughout their lifespan. In fact, some breeds like Yorkies and German Shepherds become sensitive to fear at a far earlier age, up to 40 days earlier than other breeds before they've even left breeders. So what are the factors that predispose a puppy to separation anxiety? Well, domestication, for one. Dogs were really not evolved to live for prolonged periods in isolation, and they're bred and raised to be dependent on humans. Otherwise, we'd get a lot more aggression. There are also genetic predispositions towards increased fear, anxiety, impulsivity, and frustration or dependency. And early weaning from the mother or late separation from the mother, like between the age of 5 and 24 months, can also predispose the dog to separation anxiety. Also, lack of preparation for tolerating alone time and being rehomed or relinquished. Additionally, inconsistencies in the dog-owner relationship can have an impact. So for instance, if the owner comes home one day and finds that the dog peed on the floor, then they may get very upset, and the dog may not understand why the person is upset. They don't connect it with that pee that they left 3 hours ago. And so they start to get anxious about what happens when my owner comes home. And once that chain of events gets connected, that can actually start to make them anxious about being left alone. And so we really do want to avoid punishment-based techniques, because a lot of times dogs do not understand them. And so it makes the owner very unpredictable. And so, that's just one example. There's a lot of other examples. And so that's good to keep in mind. And also changes in routine or level of exercise and enrichment. And I know this week we had a lot of heat, or this last week and last couple of weeks, there were just a ton of heat. And a lot of my clients had a big challenge getting as much exercise and enrichment as their dogs normally get. So that can have a big impact on the dog's ability to cope when alone. And then fear or anxiety of sounds. And we're not just talking about, loud sounds like gunshots, fireworks, thunderstorms. We're actually talking even more so about low level sounds like traffic noises, people talking. That can actually overlap even more, and create a far bigger issue for dogs when left alone. So we want to pay attention to all kinds of noises and noise sensitivity. And when the dog has fear or anxiety when left alone, that gets associated with being alone. So for instance, traumatic experiences like burglaries, neglect, or even getting injured. And again, as I mentioned before, fear of the owner's punishment upon return can predispose dogs to separation anxiety. So won't they just grow out of it? If I have a young puppy, they're really malleable, and won't they just, eventually grow up and grow out of it? There is a role that, malleability and learning how to cope does play in this, but I hear very often from owners, well, she never really liked her crate. Also, you have to think about whatever an animal practices, they get better at. And that's how they form habits. So if they are forming habits of being distressed when left alone, that is not necessarily just going to disappear. Finally, when dogs reach social maturity between the ages of 1 and 3, behavior problems often worsen and are more difficult to change. So they won't just always grow out of it. So what are some red flags that we should look for? Well, frequent or prolonged barking, howling, whining in the crate when alone, not settling in the crate, and not eating when confined or left alone. Anorexia, inappetence are other terms for that. And here's a video I created on understanding the different emotions and motivations and behaviors behind separation anxiety, so you can kind of get a better sense of the different types of things you're going to see within this problem. Separation anxiety is actually a syndrome, and we actually refer to it from different terms like separation-related problems, separation-related distress, separation-related behaviors. So separation anxiety is kind of the common term, but there's actually a lot of research that has different terms that are used. And it's really a syndrome as opposed to a diagnosis. So there are actually different groups within the major term of, separation anxiety and related problems. So here's this video that will help you understand a little bit more about the issue.
In 2020, a group of scientists and veterinarians did a study on dogs who struggle to relax when they are left alone. They found that when a dog feels upset about being left alone at home, there's not just one simple reason. These scientists identified 7 different kinds of behaviors that often show up when dogs have a tough time being alone. They also noticed that many of the dogs would only do some of those behaviors, So they believe that there must be 4 different kinds of problems dogs have when they're alone. In the first group, dogs feel concerned when they're away from their owner, and they try really hard to break out of their house or crate to be with them. In the second group, dogs feel threatened by things outside their house. They want to break out and fight those things, but they can't, so they get really worked up and frustrated. The third group of dogs also feels threatened about things outside, but they don't try to break out. They just feel anxious, but not as frustrated. In the last group, dogs don't like being alone because it's boring. They get excited and frustrated about all the more interesting things happening outside their house and struggle to just relax at home. So these scientists learned that dogs can have different problems when they're alone, and it's not always the same for every dog.
All right, so there are different emotions that are correlated with different behaviors, and there is some overlap. For instance, anxiety and fear can lead to restless pacing, drooling, hiding, barking, house soiling, vocalization, escape attempts. Panic and grief can lead to depression, escape attempts, howling. And this panic and grief is really related to the fear of abandonment by the caregiver. Again, because dogs were just not evolved to live for prolonged periods of isolation. But, howling, whimpering, crying, barking, panting, muscle tremors, house soiling, and anorexia. So that's actually kind of a more significant form of the problem, actually. And then frustration can lead to destruction of small items within the house and exit areas too, as well as escape attempts, barking, counter surfing, and even aggression. And that aggression is usually because what the dog wants to do, they want to get out of the house and they're not able to. So sometimes they will show aggression towards the owner that is making them come back to the house, or that is trying to leave the house because they don't want to be left. So when we see puppies with difficult behaviors, we should understand that they are behavioral emergencies. And that is what a veterinary behaviorist friend of mine told me a few years ago. They are behavioral emergencies. And the quicker they receive behavior modification and anti-anxiety medications, if needed, to support behavior change, the more likely they are to become better adjusted adult dogs. Now, there are some challenges for treating puppy separation anxiety that include the fact that they are still learning to be chew trained and potty trained. So greater amounts of space, which often benefits dogs with separation anxiety, are not yet available when the dog is supposed to be left alone. And they have a need for also shorter times between pottying, depending on their age. Additionally, they haven't practiced settling for long. They may never have been taught that kind of a skill, and they have very high energy levels. Finally, they lack the maturity and frustration tolerance and haven't formed good habits yet. So now let me go over how to potty train a puppy with separation anxiety considerations. We need to achieve 0 accidents for at least 3 weeks, and then we can loosen up some of the management. But we must confine the puppy to a very small area unless they have just gone pee and poop outside, and then they can have 15 to 30 minutes of supervised free time inside the house if they've just done both outside. After that, then they need to go back into some kind of confinement again. And so for confinement, the options really are being on a 4 to 6 foot leash, either held by or attached to a person or furniture right next to the person. They can also be created if the puppy is comfortable in the crate when the person is sitting nearby. I would not suggest walking away from the crate if it causes the dog to escalate and you're dealing with separation anxiety. They can also be held on somebody's lap. Then we want to take the puppy outside on leash every time they need to go potty and reward them with a high value food treat within 3 seconds of pottying. That food treat is really important. And if you do need to go somewhere and you don't want to leave the dog in the crate while you go do something, just put a leash on them and take them with you on leash. You can use going for a walk, like a long walk outside, as a second reward after a treat. After you've stood in place in the same place, going to the same spot each time, waiting for them to potty. And if they don't potty, return them to that confinement situation for 20 to 40 minutes or until they're ready to go again, and then try again. And management can loosen up after 3 weeks of no accidents, unless there is another accident, and then we have to tighten it up again. So this tightening and contracting process can happen, for a few months until the dog is really getting the hang of not having accidents in the house. So, and it may be a whole, until the dog is a year and a half old before house training is super solid, even if you have a solid plan in place. What about chew training? So you need to puppy proof the house, all areas where the dog is likely to spend time. You want to pick up all items that are attractive to the puppy and put them up high out of the puppy's reach. If you've ever had a toddler around the house and you have to baby proof the house, it's the same process. Put the puppy on a leash or have them drag a leash around the house while being supervised, so you can prevent them from chewing on things you don't want them to have, like furniture, if that's the situation. And put tubs on top of off-limit furniture and close off rooms, or put up baby gates to rooms where the puppy's not allowed. And then you want to give them comfortable resting areas inside the house with chew toys that are fun and enjoyable. And you must provide enough exercise and enrichment outside the house so that the puppy wants to settle when inside the house. So we're really connecting the idea of inside the house is for resting, outside the house is for doing fun, active things. So now that we've covered those basics, let me talk about what underlies the big core issues for all dogs of learning to be alone. And I like to think of it like a tabletop that rests on 4 table legs. And those table legs are exercise, enrichment, physical health, and mental health. So if those 4 table legs are sturdy, then learning to be alone will progress really well. If those 4 table legs are not sturdy and there's something that's unattended to, unnoticed, then you're going to have problems teaching the dog to be alone. So first one, exercise. So if training, if you listen to this webinar and you're starting to work on some training, if training to be alone is stalling or the dog is unable to settle, they likely need a lot more exercise beforehand. Enrichment is very helpful, but enough exercise is really imperative for separation anxiety training to be effective. And you can try increasing the amount of exercise by an hour and then reassess how things are going in your settling sessions. Good activities include dog-to-dog play, including daycare if your dog really enjoys being around other dogs, hiking, swimming, dog sports, long sniff walks. Many dogs have a fear of missing out when they haven't had enough exercise to meet their needs. And so you'll get a lot of frustration-related behaviors when trying to leave the dog alone. Here are some tips on enrichment. First of all, enrichment is fun things we give the dog to do that they were evolved to do. So using their noses, foraging, those kinds of chewing, finding things around, like foraging. But basically we want to keep these things in mind about giving enrichment to the dog. With separation anxiety issues. Give enrichment while you're present so that the puppy can enjoy it and maximize it and feel rested after doing it. Get rid of food bowls and feed the dog out of treat dispensing toys instead. That's an easy way to incorporate enrichment. Audition different enrichment activities and see which ones really help your dog's behavior change. So Himalayan yak chews, bully sticks, deer antlers, knuckle bones, marrow bones, beef bladders, ostrich bones and feet, everlasting treat balls. Those are all types of chews. Then we have other types of training, shaping games, impulse control exercises using food, scent games, dog pools, like bobbing for blueberries could be a fun hot weather activity. Searching for treats or kongs that are hidden around, the backyard or the house. Frozen toy treats like kongs. So stuffing a kong with mixed wet and dry food and then freezing it. Also putting water and kibble in a slow feeder and then freezing that. You can do similar things with topples and licky mats with wet food. And then food dispensing toys could include a snuffle mat, a Kong wobbler, a tug-a-jug, and you should rotate enrichment and give multiple forms of enrichment each day. If I just ran through that big laundry list of items and you're like, oh, wait, I wanted to write that down, don't worry. All you need to do is shoot me an email, and I have a whole sheet that goes through enrichment and gives you a sample enrichment schedule and has links to all of these items. So you don't have to go searching for things. So I'd be happy to share that with you after the webinar. And also realize that active enrichment, which is things like chews, training, food toys, that is usually going to be more helpful to you than passive enrichment, which is like sounds or having essential oils out and around. So let's talk about physical health now. Even minor physical issues can cause or contribute to separation anxiety. There is research to show this. And for younger dogs, I find that they oftentimes will have upset stomachs, ear infections, itchiness, joint pain, even from growth spurts. And these things may be very mild. So they may go undetected or untreated by a veterinarian because they're so minor, even after being examined, because the vet may feel that like, oh yeah, she has that, but it's not a huge issue. Well, for dogs that are predisposed to separation anxiety, it is a huge issue. And so, signs might include clinginess, not wanting to go out of the house, sitting down in the middle of walks, not jumping up on surfaces, panting when they're not hot. And so the researchers on this suggest treating suspected health issues and looking for effects on behavior issues, right? So that is something you really have to kind of have a conversation with your vet about to really get them behind this concept and the level of attunement that these dogs may need. Similarly, emotional health is another one of those table legs that I mentioned. So clearly, this issue of separation anxiety is one of emotional health, but we also need to look at other emotional triggers, other things that make the dog feel threatened or frustrated, like if you notice the dog becoming reactive towards strangers or other dogs, if you notice intense watchdog behavior in the house, if you notice the dog becoming really alert and vigilant about a lot of noises, or even things you notice that they're alerting to that you can't hear, that's something to pay attention to, because it may be these low-level sounds that are triggering the dog. And what we can have happen is called trigger stacking, where the puppy's in distress over the caretaker leaving, and then they hear somebody outside while they're alone, and they haven't had that much exercise. And once they are alone, if they are a little nervous around things outside the house, they don't have anybody to get information from about whether those things are safe or not. So that can really intensify their anxiety while alone. So we really want to and that could give them a much bigger reaction also than they would otherwise have. So we need to address all of these different triggers in a way that can be affected or effective when the dog is actually alone, right? So we can't have somebody like giving them treats to counter condition that, because they're alone. So who's going to do that, you know? And it's really not practical either. So we need to figure out ways to address all potential triggers that might impact being alone. And so one of the things that I found very helpful is actually masking external triggers, closing blinds, closing drapes, turning on noise machines. Noise machines can actually cancel out certain frequencies as opposed to just turning on a television or music. So that's really helpful. And sometimes you actually need window film to completely cover a window, because the dog or the puppy may still see figures moving outside the house. And if they're nervous about it, that could be a trigger for them. So we also want to look at anti-anxiety medication for certain cases. And if alone training is stalling, then the level of anxiety when the dog is alone may require medication to be successful, even when we go through very gradual alone time training. We also need to address how, if the dog is showing distress already when left alone, we need to address how to prevent distress between our comfortable training sessions, comfortable alone time training sessions. So it's really impossible to make progress on comfortably being alone if the puppy is experiencing intense distress between those experiences, between comfortable departures, because they're shorter perhaps, and the longer ones are really uncomfortable. We are not going to be able to make progress with the puppy being left alone. So we have, a couple different kinds of medication options there. We have fast-acting medications that will take effect for super stressful situations, which I'll talk about in a bit more. And we also have longer acting anti-anxiety medications that can help a number of different triggers that the dog might be experiencing worry about. So we have to look at the level of distress and also the number of triggers when we're thinking about emotional health and addressing that. So what techniques are we going to use to treat this issue? I use 3 different techniques: desensitization, habituation, and counter conditioning in some cases with food. So desensitization is going very gradually so that the dog is completely relaxed. The puppy is completely relaxed and at ease during the process, and we're not pushing them past what they're comfortable with. So we have to be watching early subtle signs of discomfort in order to be successful with this. We can't let them have full-blown frustration outbursts or anxiety outbursts. Then we have habituation. So habituation works really well for like keys, sounds of doors opening and closing, cars turning off and on. It's not so great for like a social trigger, like your favorite person leaving you, but it is really good for getting the dog used to the sounds of things that indicate you're going to leave. So we just keep making these sounds and these sights happen over and over and over again in a way that allows the dog to become less and less vigilant about them over time. And then we have counter conditioning, and that is, I love this sign: good things never happen. They cross that out and put good things happen. So basically it's associating an event that was previously very unpleasant with something really good. And so I have found, and I'm going to talk more about how to do this in training today, I've found that to be really helpful. So it's very important that we understand the role that predictability plays in alone time training. And all animals survive by noticing patterns that A leads to B, and then they can, take advantage of that situation and get what they need. So all animals learn this way. And they also learn that we also know that unpredictability creates and worsens anxiety. That's why you have those big, escalations in heart rates when something shocking happens. And this is known as the safety hypothesis, which says that, if you don't know when something really bad might happen, then you're going to be vigilant, all the time, waiting for that thing to happen. So how can we lessen anxiety? Well, we need to signal to the dog and the puppy what is happening now, even if it's unpleasant, so that they can at least relax the rest of the time. Similarly, to prevent frustration, we can do things like putting on your puppy's gear before you take them for a walk instead of getting your stuff on first, because if they're a little nervous about that situation, then that just adds to their anxiety and frustration. So just put their stuff on first, and then they can relax and know they are going. And if you don't put their stuff on first, then they can, then they know they're not going. So it's very clear. So how do we improve predictability? Well, we are going to signal all departures. All departures? Yes, all departures. Because if you are trying to sneak out of the house so your puppy doesn't know that you're gone, it becomes much worse when they do figure out you're gone. Then they're going to feel like they had the rug pulled out from under them. So the way that we do this too is we want to get the dog understanding that we are going to create comfortable departures for them. And ideally, we would actually eliminate any uncomfortable departures altogether and only provide comfortable ones. So we teach the dog that a certain signal means you're going to have a comfortable departure. But if we can't completely eliminate, the uncomfortable departures because of, the world we live in and our schedules, we have to separate those two contexts from each other. So we have a separate cue that signals the uncomfortable departure, and that is only a temporary situation if it happens. We also work for these uncomfortable departures to minimize or eliminate as much as possible any discomfort they might feel. And I'll talk more about that in a second. But eventually, the comfortable context becomes the only type of departure that the dog has, and the other signal, the uncomfortable departure signal, stops being used after the puppy works up to whatever amount of time you want them to be alone. So I typically like to have people use a road cone that I put out in the puppy's view at the very beginning of the training session and the comfortable departure. And then I, put it away at the end of the comfortable departure. And this will always be used. You never get rid of this. So just know that you will always have a signal to tell your dog that you're going to be leaving and they're going to be okay and safe. And then we have this discomfort cue, or this non-training alone time cue. That's a temporary cue. I usually recommend people use a sign posted on the back of the door that you're leaving out of, or within the puppy's view. And I would always pair it with, if the dog is experiencing distress, situational anti-anxiety medications. So it's very important in this training that we minimize or eliminate all uncomfortable departures while working on comfortable ones. Now, if we just don't leave our dog alone ever and don't work on any kind of departure, their problems will actually get worse. So we cannot just never leave them alone, or they're going to start getting anxious when we leave the room too. It's like it will get worse. We have to use exposure therapy to get them used to these things, but in a very gradual way. So we do not want them experiencing intense distress, even if we've signaled it with this other cue, because we don't know exactly how much they've picked up from that other signal, right? We're not exactly sure like how much that has sunk into their brain. So we really want to minimize or eliminate that. And there are a few different ways you can do this. You can leave them with a pet sitter if they are comfortable with anyone. You can take them to doggy daycare if they like playing with other dogs and they're old enough to go. And that's a great source of enrichment and exercise. You can minimize or eliminate discomfort by using a fast-acting anti-anxiety medication plus lots of exercise and enrichment beforehand. And by fast-acting or situational anti-anxiety meds, those are often used by vets, general vets, before stressful situations like vet visits or thunderstorms. So they can usually prescribe that to their clients. And it's given anywhere from 1.5 to 3 hours before a stressful event, and it should last for a number of hours and then wear off. And this is temporary for most dogs. And we must know how this medication is working. You can't just give it and then leave and then expect that everything's fine, because sometimes the puppy's nervous systems are so upset that the medication doesn't work well enough. And so you still are having way more anxiety than is going to be good for them. So what we do is you can get Wi-Fi video cameras that you can access on a smartphone, so you can watch what your puppy's doing while you're gone, and you can track any what I call non-training alone time, which is like the uncomfortable times, and track them over time and adjust the medications with the vet to fully take care of this distress that your puppy may be feeling if they haven't, gradually worked up with any skills yet. So just to be clear, the comfort cue is only used in our training sessions to help the puppy get comfortable. It decreases the importance of other cues, so people don't have to hide cues about like, well, when I pull out my keys, she really freaks out, because we've already told her this is this context, and then everything else that happens afterward is no longer such a tip-off. It makes behavior change. It makes changes in your behavior predictable. So I'm going to talk more about what we do with this cue. And it's a no attention cue to help the dog become more independent even while we're still present. So we're really gradually introducing that idea of soothing themselves. It tells the puppy that they aren't coming with us and that they can go settle. And it's a constant visual reminder to the puppy in case they fall asleep and while you're gone, and then they wake up and they're like, oh my gosh, where's my mom? They look at the cue and they know, oh, she's still gone. Okay, and I'm still okay. So once the comfort training cue appears, you want to pretend like you don't have a dog. So once this comes out, it should be the first thing that comes out. You're not going to talk to the dog. You're not going to make direct eye contact with the dog, although you can look at them out of the side of your eye, and you're not going to pet them while it's out, because this helps them to learn the concept of settling on their own without constant reassurance from you. Once the training cue or the comfort cue comes out, we always are walking the same path to the door in our training experience. And we want to return as quickly as possible without running, especially when we're trying new and hard things. And when the training cue goes away, you can start to interact with your puppy again, but try not to overdo it. You want to be on the more relaxed side when you're talking to them afterwards. But still, it gives them a very clear understanding of what is going on, which really helps them to settle. So where should you do this kind of training? I suggest an area that the puppy is already comfortable, where they spend time with you. You do not want to confine them to a basement or a bathroom to do this training. It is just not, it doesn't have good associations with it already built in. I also like the area closest to the door so that you don't have to work too hard to get outside. And you can start inside of a crate if the puppy is comfortable with you nearby, at least, right? But I always transition outside of the crate as the puppy is fully house trained and chew trained. And I'll talk more about that in a second. So here is the training cue and the training sequence. So first you set out the comfort cue. Then you're going to set up so you can watch the dog when you're gone, and you're going to sit next to them, probably on like a living room couch. Then you're going to wait for them to settle, ideally, or at least some approximation of settling, ideally head down. And then you're going to walk away a certain number of steps, whatever you want. Or you're going to increase the time alone if that's where you are in your training. And then you're going to come back and return to them. And I usually do a number of repetitions, a lot of repetitions as I'm just working to get the person out the door. And then the repetitions will vastly decrease as we're just working on increasing alone time. So that is the sequence, right? Now, I love this sequence, but I've found that there are some dogs with so much frustration, and they're used to getting attention all the time. And when that person sits on the couch and looks at their phone, they get very frustrated and they just bark, bark, bark. And a lot of puppies are like this too. I have to admit, I didn't have the the video on when I have a couple of videos, but they weren't as fantastic as this one. So I am going to share with you now this session where this happened and how we ended up modifying my training techniques so that we could address it. This is a first session with this client. It's not a puppy, but this is very puppy-like behavior. And she's ignoring her because she set out this training cue. And we're working on, taking a few steps away and sitting down again. I'm actually texting her. And the dog is like, hello, lady, come over here. Why are you not talking to me? Why are you not petting me? This is very, very frustrating.
Okay, we're gonna try something different here. Okay, so I'm gonna come back and just talk for a second here. So can you does she if you gave her a piece of kibble, would she eat it?
If I give her a piece of what now?
Like kibble?
Yeah, she would totally eat that.
Okay, cool. So I'm gonna let's put the iPad on the table and kind of just orient it towards where she is for now. And if you could get a bowl of kibble, and we want it to be somewhere she's not going to be able to get it, but a place that's not towards walking to the door. So ideally it would be on like a shelf or an end table that she wouldn't get to, behind, like in the opposite direction of the door you leave out of.
Can I load the Furbo?
Well,
sorry,
I'd rather not actually,
Okay.
because there's a few things around how we give it to her. So
Okay.
just get like a little bowl and fill it with a kibble, and we'll put it. We can look for a place to put it.
All right, so she's grabbing this food. And I did edit this video.
Yeah, so if you want to pick up your phone and kind of let me see what's behind or around where you're sitting on the couch.
So we're trying to.
Yeah, if I do anything, if I'm not carrying it with me, she will go after it the second I leave it.
Okay, we might have to put it up high then.
So there's nowhere up high behind me.
Okay, so we could do it on the shelf next to your television.
Okay, that's
Okay, great. So then now I'm going to kind of coach you through this process. I'm going to turn off my video, but I'm going to talk you through the process.
Okay.
Good. So go ahead and sit down. Yeah, you could sit there if you want. That's pretty good. That's kind of simple. That's simpler than getting up and going across the room. Okay, so now sometimes when we first start with this kind of training, the dogs are like, give me the treat, and so they're in your face and everything. And it may take a session or two of you just kind of waiting until she finally like lays down somewhere, and then you're going to get up and give her a piece of kibble. But the rules for giving kibble are that she needs to be in a down to collect the kibble, okay? So you're going to lure her into a sit and then a down, and then put the kibble in between her front legs, okay?
Okay.
Okay, you're still not making eye contact with her. You're still not talking to her. You're still not petting her. You're not telling her to lie down with like a command. You're just luring her with the treat on her nose and then like nose to toes. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so now grab one treat. Okay, get her in a sit and then a down, and give her the treat in between her front, or in between her front legs. Good, good. All right, very good. All right, now I want you to stand up, get another piece of kibble, and if she's still in the down, get her, just put it between her two front legs. If she's not, just lure her into the sit and then the down and give it to her again. Good, perfect. And then sit down again. Good. And is it possible to move the ottoman a little bit so I could see her with the iPad? Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Okay, awesome. Okay, and then just a hair more. Thank you so much. Okay, good. Now we also want to make sure that you're able to get down the hallway when you need to. So I don't want it to the ottoman to block your like walking towards the door.
It's fine.
Okay. All right, cool. So I'm gonna wait here for a second until, just for a sec, to see if she will give up. Maybe she won't. Just continue to ignore, and we will kind of prime her a little bit in that case if she is not willing to give up. But at least I'd like kind of a sit somewhere at least, unless we just have to keep priming her with, cueing or luring into the down. So I don't want you to grab the treats until you're coming back. Good. Now walk one step towards the door, come back and get the treat and put it between her two front paws. Good. Come right back. Get the kibble, put it between her two front paws. Even if she gets up, it's okay. Still just lure her into the down. And put it, oops, if her bottom pops up, good. Yes, you would pull it away and try again. Very good. All right, good. Now stand up, treat in the down, and then sit down again. Good. And the key is she must be in the down to collect the treat. So if she eats it in the down and then stands up, that's okay. But we want to make sure she's not getting up while she gets the treat, just FYI. I'm gonna wait till she sits again before I have you do the next repetition. So just relax and ignore her. Once she lays down, the next step is going to be to walk 2 steps towards the door, come back, get a treat, and lure her into the down or give her the treat in the down. 2, it's fine if she gets up and follows you, you're still going to lure her back into the down. Good, and sit down again. Good. Ignore her. And I never want you to carry treats on you in this situation, because if you carry treats on you, then we're never sure whether she's concerned about you going to the door or whether she's excited about getting the treats, okay?
He just assumes that I have treats on me at all times.
At all times. I get it. I get it. And then we're also sort of capturing her giving up. And that's when I have you get up, do the next thing, and then reward her. So when she relaxes, that predicts you finally, rewarding her. So go ahead, stand up, treat, sit down. Good. And put it on the floor. I couldn't see, but I think you did put it on the floor instead of handing it to her. That's good.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, good. And now go ahead and stand up treat and sit down. And you want to place it so that she doesn't like run after it, because we're trying to deliver the treat in a very relaxed manner when we put it on the ground. Good. Good. All right.
So then I fast forwarded to the end of the session, and we were waiting for her hip to flip over here. So we're always looking for the dog to settle a bit more before you get
Walk
to
4
the
steps,
next
return and treat.
repetition. And that is how we're conditioning that relaxation to start. And this is very helpful for puppies in teaching them how to relax and stop going, right? We are catching them doing it. And then we're getting up, taking a couple steps away or going all the way out or whatever we're doing. And then
Walk halfway to the door, return and treat.
And then returning and only getting that treat on our way back from going away. So the dog is clearly telling us, what do they think about what we're doing and walking away? And then a separate response is also
okay, good. So let's stop for tonight and we're gonna talk through this.
A separate response is also, what do they think about the treat that they're going to get? So it's okay if they raise their head up for the treat, but we don't want to confuse that with what are they thinking about when we're going towards the door. So I found this very helpful for, easily frustrated puppies or puppies behind barriers, like baby gates, exercise pens, really young dogs that are starting in crates. It's helpful also for worried dogs and puppies that are food motivated. And you can use the lowest value food that your puppy will eat. You never carry treats on you, always put them in a bowl. And it allows you to see whether your dog is vigilant about you leaving or excited about the treats because the treats aren't on you. Then you can put the bowl in the opposite direction from the door, from where you're seated or right behind you. You could put it on top of their crate if they're in a crate or up high on a bookshelf behind the seat. And there, you need to make sure there's no access for the dog when they're by themselves. You only take a treat after you return from exiting, and you can even give up to 5 treats in a row, especially for like a dog that you're working with in a crate at the time. And when you return, make sure to put the dog in a down to collect their treat, meaning that their elbows and their hind end are on the floor. You do not verbally cue them. You lure them with the treat on their nose. And if they're already in a down, just give it to them between their 2 front paws. And then we wait again between the next rep for the dog to relax, for the puppy to settle a bit more before you do the next repetition. And you can get rid of this technique if you find that it's too distracting, or if the dog has actually left the room during the training session and you're okay with that. So it's not something you have to do forever, but it can be very helpful for beginning to teach the settling process for young puppies. So here's the sequence with food. Set out the training comfort cue, set up your rest of your stuff and sit down, wait for some kind of a settle, some approximation of a settle or a head down, get up, walk away, or increase the duration of alone time that you're working on. Come back and grab one treat, or up to 5 if you're going to give them one in a row, up to 5, and lure them into a down to get that food. Now let's talk about why I don't use crates as a long-term solution for separation anxiety dogs. Because this is, the barriers of the house are a problem for puppies and dogs with separation anxiety. That barrier is preventing the dog from having choice and control over their lives and doing the things that they would like to do, which is usually go with you or, defend against some threat or escape even from some noise in the house if they're noise sensitive. So then when we shrink the size of the barrier down to the size of a crate, it just intensifies all of that anxiety and frustration, all of those core emotional issues that the dog is having when left alone. However, for some dogs, a crate can be a great interim solution, especially for puppies, for when they're beginning to train, when they're not fully house trained, they're not fully potty trained and chew trained. And also, if people want to give it a shot, like they want to try crating before they leave the dog out, they just really want to try that. You can always transition out of the crate eventually, and you won't lose anything with your later training. So here is a quick just example. It's more so for me to show you a person who really wants to start with the dog in a crate. She really, really wanted to do this. And also just some of the problems that we do have with the crate when we're dealing with the dog, kind of with
I can't tell if he's looking for more treats or
a
she's
high
upset.
trait of frustration.
All right, so the next time he sits, then walk one step, return and treat.
So basically, we're still waiting for her to at least settle a little bit.
Make sure he's in it down.
You can also put the crates next to each other if you have another dog that is crate trained that likes the crate, or if you're still in the process of puppy proofing the house. Okay, so we can start with people's goals and go from there. Here is another example of a client who really wanted to start in the crate because she wasn't sure about leaving the dog and cat alone together. But eventually we did transition out of the crate and the dog did fantastic. And the dog and cat were okay together. But you can see how the sequence works with using food and a crate, right? So they are, they're waiting for the dog's head to go down while waiting nearby. And then they get up, they walk towards the door and do whatever it is that their exercise was. That was just to go treat the dog. It wasn't to walk really away. But then we wait for the dog's head to go down again. We walk towards the door, and you can see that they come back and get the food afterwards. Sometimes they would also put it on top of the crate, but we're conditioning this relaxed behavior, head down inside the crate. And that is the dog telling us also like, hey, I want to have you get up and walk away again so I can get a treat. So we're doing this counter conditioning, which I really like. And then I kind of sped it up for the last, this was like the last repetition. I edited the video so you could see kind of the end of this session. And this dog ended up at like multiple hours alone, but he did so much better when we just got rid of the crate because it's such a core issue for these types of dogs that have high levels of frustration. So I've still found unless the dog really, really does well in a crate before and something went wrong, they usually are better off outside of the crate in the long term. So training with food, it teaches the dog not to follow and to settle. It teaches them to relax and to put their heads down. And remember, you always give treats after you return. This is not rewarding the dog for good behavior. Because it's not dependent on the dog's behavior. It teaches the dog that every time you leave, they get something good. The food is not dependent on their behavior. Even if they get upset, you would still give the food. If they won't go into a down, which I like to have them do to kind of reinforce like where they're getting the treat and kind of not to run to the door, we can still take approximations of a down for a while and then kind of withhold it a little longer on the floor, and eventually they put their elbows down. And we can gradually shape that over time. So now let's talk about what we're looking for in alone time training, body language wise, for puppies. So I would progress at each step where your puppy is showing resting behavior, relaxed eyes, head down, or their head up, but with their body relaxed and their eyes relaxed. You can progress if your dog goes to the door or even takes a lap around the house after you have left, not before you left, but after you've left, but eventually settles into some kind of a down. And sometimes you have to wait a while for these things to happen. I would stick on the same level of difficulty where your puppy has their head up, they're alertly watching you with their eyes, They may sit at the door after you've left, but they won't completely settle. They might even give a couple of whines or paws at a barrier, but it doesn't continue for very long. So you're working at an okay pace there, at an okay level of difficulty. And they may intermittently even put teeth on the bar of a crate or X-Pen while laying down. As long as that doesn't escalate, it's okay. And of course, we do want to transition out of confinement as the dog is house trained or chew trained and potty trained. And then I would drop back to an easier step when your puppy runs to the edge of their confinement area as you're leaving. If they're standing really stiffly, perhaps with their nose to the door or the baby gate or X-Pen or the crate, and they don't settle. Anytime where your puppy is pacing around without settling, any kind of continued barking, scratching, counter surfing, panting, or giving frequent wide snappy yawns, that shows a lot of tension in the mouth and anxiety. And anytime they start to grab items or chew on household items or furniture, it's too much. You've got to back up and work things up again. Now, you may need to re-strategize if you're getting a lot of this. So you may need to puppy-proof your house so that they aren't finding things to then go get more and more excited about. You may need to look at physical health. Maybe there's some underlying thing you don't even realize is happening. You may need to increase exercise and enrichment and reassess. You may need to add anti-anxiety medication, or you may need to change the setup. So maybe it's really at the point where you're out of the house and the crate is still very difficult when you're actually gone. So you need to transition out of the crate at that point. So here are some tips for success for the training process. Break up opening doors into little segmented repetitions. So you're not going to open the door the whole way the first time, maybe just an inch. And then when your dog is relaxed about that, you go further. Pick up distractions like toys about 20 minutes before training so that they're not using that to spin themselves up into higher arousal and energy. Keep training sessions really short for puppies, like 10 to 15 minutes max. If a puppy can't sit still at first, you are going to need to train really fast with food to help them settle. And start inside a crate or exercise pen if the puppy's comfortable inside with you nearby, and transition to a living room or similar space as the puppy is chew and potty trained. Train after exercise and enrichment when the puppy is tired, and build alone time very gradually, generally like 10% time increases, starting in seconds, not minutes. Throw in easier repetitions and durations to help keep your puppy relaxed. So even though they're not supposed to show any signs of anxiety, there may be like a head lift, right? And so throw in an easy step for them so you can kind of settle them back a little bit more. And end on the hardest step or length of time. And come in early if your puppy is not doing well, unless you think they're going to settle soon. What about food toys during training? This is often suggested as an initial way to get a puppy comfortable with being left alone. And I say, try it. And if it works, great. However, if you're going to do more active formal training like I do, I don't recommend this for alone time training sessions. It's okay for emergencies, but we don't want to give puppies toys to distract them, because we wouldn't teach them any other skills that way. You don't take them to basic manners and then give them toys to play with while you're trying to teach them to walk nicely on a leash, like at the point where you're trying to get that nice leash walking behavior, maybe as a reward, but not like when you're actually teaching that skill. And they can also, I've seen clients finish that toy and then they have this pent up energy still. They're not completely relaxed. So it gets turned into destruction and counter surfing, and it just escalates. And they don't learn how to tolerate some frustration and rest. And so that's also where puppy proofing the house is so important. So now let's talk about some different kinds of cases that I've had. Here's Butters. Butters was a 5-month-old puppy. And they wrote me and said, my little Shishan, 5 months old, cannot be left alone for a second. Even if I go downstairs to grab water, he throws the biggest hissy fit. I cannot leave the house with him crying, without him crying nonstop. I went to the gym the other day and crated him, and he cried for 2 hours nonstop. I know this because my roommates told me. So they had had him for 7 weeks when they contacted me, and he was flown over in a crate, and they had adopted him from Oregon. And so we decided to use an X pen instead of a crate, and they left him in their upstairs bedroom to start because they had roommates, and we didn't use food with him because he didn't need it. So here's his training graph while we worked together. And the blue columns are the final duration of alone times of all the training sessions, the formal training sessions we did. And also the dates are also indicators of those training sessions as well. And the red columns are actually the length of time of the owner's non-training alone time durations. So times they left the dog alone outside of training times. And they did non-training alone time throughout our work together because they wanted to. I didn't suggest it or say do it, but we tracked it. And we saw that it improved as training progressed, even though the training sessions were much more gradual to help condition that relaxation in the puppy. So you can see I put numbers at the top of the red columns. 1 was completely settled the whole time. 2 was eventually settles, so maybe some barking, but then settles. And 3 was distressed and not settled. And you can see that by the time we had worked together for about 6 weeks, he was completely settled for 2 hours at a time. And I received like a really nice review at the end of our training together. And I have seen this process of training in many other cases as well. And they tend to be more minor separation anxiety issues, and they mostly don't need anti-anxiety medication to be successful. And I've seen it especially work in, minor cases with younger dogs. So here's Coda. Coda this is what they wrote me. He's a 9-month-old Husky Pit Bull mix who we adopted 2 months ago. He previously never destroyed any items around the house, but over the last several weeks, his separation anxiety and level of destruction has increased substantially, beginning with a pair of shoes here and there to now consistently chewing up any items in sight whenever we leave, including items that are dangerous to his health, remote controls, cables, foods he should not be eating, etc. When we tried to crate him, he broke out of it, bending and breaking the wire crate and sliding through the wire. We fear that he could hurt himself again if we try again. He could hurt himself if we try again. He had chewed, they told me he'd chewed on a battery. He also had a number of physical issues. He had chronic stomach upset, including diarrhea. They had tried crate training, as I mentioned, and he had whined loudly and would not tolerate the crate when inside. He liked to sit near this window. They lived on an upper floor of an apartment and watch outside. And he didn't react to anything outside, so that was okay. He had chronic itching of his tail and leg to the point where he had to go to the ER because he couldn't get up. And he also had hip dysplasia. And so he took medication sometimes for that. And he would generally wait at the door and then search around the house for things to chew on. So for him, we again did not use food for him. We started training outside the crate from the start on a bed and with access to the living room and the door open. And I started from the beginning to condition relaxation while resting, while they were leaving and gone. And we gradually worked up to 2.5 hours. But he did have a setback because they left him with a toy during one of the training sessions. And he went from that to other things in the house, so like pillows, to the point where he was jumping up on the counter all in the same session. So giving him a toy while they were expecting to settle and be left alone was really a bad idea for him. So I recommended increasing exercise and puppy proofing the house to overcome this challenge. And puppy proofing was sometimes a challenge for them. they would leave things out accidentally. And I also recommended anti-anxiety medication, but they didn't go forward with that while we were working together. They really wanted to do it without that. He also started anti-itch medication to help with agitation while alone, because I've seen that can be, it's like the dog feels something, and then instead of resting again, they kind of get up and go start looking for things to do. And he needed lots of exercise, enrichment, and medication for itchiness and joints. So balancing that was also a process in helping him relax. But they were pretty happy at the end of the process, and they continued working up in time on their own afterwards. And you can see that we had kind of overcome that frustration issue at the end of our work together. So Hachi, here's Hachi. Here's the email I got from her. Hachi is a 10-week-old Frenchie who's been home with us for 2 weeks. We understand it's early and he's still adjusting to us, our home, and being away from his litter mates, but we've observed concerning separation issues. When left alone for only minutes, Hachi will whine, bark, climb his crate, and almost immediately urinate and defecate. He once defecated 4 times in 1 hour out of anxiety. When with someone, he exhibits proper house training habits and is very good with people, children, and other dogs. We'd like to understand the proper measures to put in place early so he can be set up for independence. I'm concerned this is very unusual, and if we don't get ahead of it, these behaviors will become habit. And she's absolutely right. So when we first started training, they couldn't take like 2 steps away from this dog without him running and following them immediately. And our sessions had to be very short because his attention span was almost 0. And we started in a penned off area, which was the kitchen originally, and then transitioned him to a gated penned off gated area in their dining room. And he was not fully house trained or chew trained at all when we started. He actually started anti-anxiety medication with a veterinary behaviorist at my recommendation when he was only 4 months and 3 weeks old. So that is how young a dog could be and need anti-anxiety medication. And you can see that he really needed anti-anxiety medication to progress, even though he was only 4 months old when he started it. So we have the long-acting medication and we have the short-acting medication. He needed both to be successful, but he was eventually very successful. I'm sure they've gone over 2 hours at this point. And you know, he has come a long way. And here's also, this graph shows the change in ratings during his training sessions over time. So I always try to keep the dogs from running toward people during training because that escalates their arousal and behavior. But as you can see, he was often vigilant, which would be a rating of a 2, and sometimes running towards them, which would be a rating of a 3. But it really diminished over the course of our sessions. And we like worked together for a while, then they took a long break. And then, or not a long break, but they took a break, like a 3-month break, and then we finished up our work together. So he was a very difficult, kind of complex case and a very young puppy. So this is Teddy. He is the Wheaton Terrier, the lighter one here, and Jaxie. And Teddy was 5 months old. My 5-month-old puppy cries when I leave home, or after a short time if I leave the room and when I went in a crate. My 7-year-old dog is now also upset when I leave home. Before the puppy, he was fine being left alone. I have read and tried many things and really need help. So we started with them inside an X pen with Teddy and not Jaxie inside an X pen to give Jaxie, the other dog, space. And because Teddy was not fully house trained, chew trained or potty trained. Jaxie had become scared of being in the crate when he was next to Teddy, who was having intense separation anxiety and frustration when in the crate next to Jaxie. So training took 4.5 months, which is very normal for these issues. Teddy always felt more comfortable when he was able to access Jaxie and more frustrated when he thought Jaxie had left or was becoming active but not accessible to him. And when he calmed down, Jaxie stayed a lot closer to him. And the owner discovered that Jaxie was stealing toys and hiding them in his own crate with the open door crate, and would try to go in the crate in the other room to get away from Teddy. So because of that, I recommended putting up all the toys so the dogs didn't feel possessive of them between each other. And this led to them becoming more friendly with each other, calmer, and having less intense play, especially in the house, and us eventually allowing Teddy outside to remain next to Jaxie. So Jaxie's separation distress disappeared when Teddy became calmer, and they did so well out in the home together, and they worked up to 4 hours of alone time by the time we stopped working together. But Teddy did need some anti-anxiety meds as well. And you can see both that we started meds pretty soon, and we also got outside the exercise pen, and that really helped a lot too. So you can see these factors that are so important for progress. So with that, I am finished, and thank you guys so much for joining me today. I hope you found this webinar interesting and helpful, and please feel free to reach out to me if you'd like the enrichment handout, or if you have any other questions or need additional help.
That was fantastic. We do have a bunch of questions. Her big question is, she may be getting a job where she'll be in the office 1 day a week, and she has always worked from home. She's not sure what the best care for her anxious pup is for that 1 day. So her dog is a 2-year-old male Cavapoo. He's very social thanks to puppy kindergarten with YDF. He has had isolation anxiety, and he's on 1 Reconcile and 1/2 of a Trazodone each day that has helped settle him. His barking is as follows. When I'm gone, if we are playing with car rides, he's not a fan of car rides, and she has a Wise camera to see his behavior. Sometimes he settles very well, other times he barks the whole time. So she's feeling like it's very unpredictable.
Yeah, so I would say for like temporary management for your 1 day a week in the office, I would say, you know, doing a pet sitter or doggy daycare could be a possibility. Also looking at more intense situational or fast-acting anti-anxiety meds for those stressful times. And I think that it'd be worth also looking at all of the factors that I just talked about, because there's probably a lot more that can be done for his case if you want to put in the time and resources to actually work on separation anxiety training for him to learn the skills to be left alone while you're gone.
Excellent. So Meredith says, hello, I have a new Corgi puppy and I do not work from home.
Okay.
A friend of mine will dog sit during the day, but eventually I want to leave the dog for up to 8 hours. She's doing relatively well with me being gone 30 to 45 minutes, but when I shower, will bark for 7 to 8 minutes, though I leave her with a treat Kong, which she will start eating but abandon. She has only been with me for a week, but I want to make sure she is adjusting as well as possible.
Great. So I do think that the gradual departure desensitization that I just showed and do would be very, very helpful, because sometimes it's harder for puppies to tolerate you actually being like there but out of reach than it is for you to be completely gone, because that level of frustration behind a barrier that they see you but they can't get to you is so intense for them. So I have found that once you start working on departure desensitization, then, you know, you being behind a gate is no longer an issue. But yeah, I do think that starting out with some relaxation training, gradual departure training, and, you know, with the methods I just talked about would be really helpful.
Okay, so Beth is asking, if you crate the puppy after a potty accident, won't it make reaction to the crate become negative?
Well, it depends on, you're not going to crate them directly after a potty accident. It's not like it's a punishment for having a potty accident. You need to get a system in place in general so that they are always in some kind of confinement unless they have just gone pee and poop outside. And you would bet $100 that they're not going to have an accident in the next 10 or 15 or 30 minutes, right? So otherwise they can be on a leash. They can be tethered to you, tethered to a piece of furniture nearby you. They can be sitting in your lap. They can be in a crate with you nearby, as long as they're not upset in the crate. So I'm not using the crate as any kind of like punishment. The crate should only be used to the degree that the dog is okay sitting in the crate while you're there.
Wendy added to hers, she had the very first question. I have used a fan on medium high instead of noise cancellation. Is that equivalent? So is a fan equivalent to noise cancellation?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I know the exact answer to that, but I think it is a pretty good answer, because I know that fans can definitely like cancel a lot of noises out. You can get multiple things, so you could try like a noise machine near a door, near a window, and then have a fan that's clear or nearby. So
yeah, I actually use a box fan, the square ones that sometimes they put in windows.
yeah.
And those are loud. And
Great.
so they are definitely a good masker of sound. Hannah asks, so doggy daycare wouldn't be advised against from a training standpoint?
No, as long as the dog is doing well there. And dogs are very contextual too. So even if they do use a crate at the daycare and leave the dog there, some dogs tend to do better in crates in a situation like that, because they're next to other dogs and they're tired. And also, there's gradations to all of these things. We want the ideal. That's what we really want to go for. So you have to assess your dog and see, do they seem like they're doing better, or do they seem like they're doing worse when they're having these things? And do they enjoy playing with other dogs, or do they ignore other dogs constantly? And, we try to take them in and they don't want to go in. And so you really have to kind of assess the individual. But generally, I think it's a great thing, because I think a lot of younger dogs and puppies need this intense level of exercise that is just so hard for people to get them at this age. And good dog daycares can provide that. And, then you can gradually work up in the alone time. And so you have a management solution as well. So I think it really depends on the puppy, and also making sure they're having positive experiences there.
Stephanie says, my puppy will howl and cry for up to half an hour if left alone, and will try to escape by jumping over the gate and mostly ignoring things like food. What might help distract her from this, as she does this even if she is in her area while I am in the room next to her?
Yeah, I think you need to increase exercise and enrichment while you're around, and also look at gradual departure desensitization training, and any other emotional health issues, like the degree. It sounds like a pretty high degree of anxiety. So maybe an anti-anxiety medication would be something to look into. So really, this webinar, I would say, just like drill down into it and pursue these options here, because it's not an easy fix, right? This is sometimes a complex issue that needs real attention and effort to solve. It's solvable though, but it does need a lot of strategizing sometimes.
Excellent. And remember, everybody, when Alexandra mentions, working on departure cues and all that stuff, you can always contact Alexandra for help working with you. So next question, at our home, crates are open. Our canine daughters must go inside when guests visit. The dogs leave the crate when guests leave.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's really a great way to keep everybody safe and calm too. And if they're, they've learned how to do that, that's very impressive.
Wendy's wondering what the fast-acting stress meds that you reference are called.
Yeah, so I'm not a veterinarian, so I can't recommend individual medications. I should say talk to your veterinarian, because they're going to be the first people that will know of like what kind of medications are given for thunderstorms or for stressful vet visits. And the deal is, you really have to find what works for your dog specifically, because physiologies are different between individuals. And there are some dogs that just really need to see a veterinary behaviorist, because the general ones that are recommended are not going to be useful, like they're not going to work on them. So sometimes you really do need to see a veterinary behaviorist who really specializes in helping you trial and find the right medication or combination of medications.
And we actually in June did a really good webinar on, does my dog need a veterinary behavior? So she really goes into at the very beginning the difference between a trainer, a behavior consultant, a veterinary behavior. So if you're wondering about those kinds of things, it was through Your Dog's Friend. That does look like it is the last question. Alexandra, again, thank you so much for presenting such a thorough, formative webinar.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you all for joining us today too.